Aloha, Gene. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to know, in regards to Iran, do you think that Russia and China will really come to help Iran when the time comes?
I think they will, without a question, because Russia and China have been playing Neville Chamberlain in this hope that if they let the U.S. grab a few small countries, that we'll be satisfied and cut it out. And that was the same mistake Neville Chamberlain made with Adolf Hitler. And I think Russia and China have come to understand that this whole goal of world domination that was set forth in the policy papers of the Project for the New American Century, that, the U.S. really means it. They're out to try and conquer the world and make the entire world slaves to private central banking and, whack all of Israel's enemies at the same time. And there's a lot of overlap between Israel and private central banking. Let's not kid ourselves. There's a lot of alignment of purpose there. So, I think if we go into Iran, that's going to be the point at which Russia and China are going to say, all right, we really didn't want to have a global thermonuclear war, but now's the time to turn those little keys.
Well, I noticed that, I heard that Putin didn't really, he actually kicked out a lot of the central bankers from Russia, and that's how they've been able to really be prosperous.
That's exactly what they did. They kicked out the oligarchs, and the new Russian republics paid off all their debt in like 3 years. Wouldn't you like to see that here in the United States of America? All of the valid debt, the non-odious debt, paid off in just 3 years instead of a government that intentionally plunges us all further and further into debt year after year after year with no end in sight. If Putin could get on the ballot, I'd vote for him. We got to take a break for commercials. Thanks a lot for the phone call. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Alrighty, let's see. Pakistani militants have announced a truce with Pakistan. This is not exactly the outcome the United States wanted. The United States was going to ally with the Pakistan militants and overthrow the government of Pakistan and secure those nuclear weapons of mass destruction. And all of a sudden the militants, the rebels, have said, we're going to side with the government. Okay? We're going to go over to the government, we're going to kiss and make up, and we're going to kick the United States out. And one more of the little bricks in the wall to wall off Iran prior to that attack ain't going to happen. We're losing this one. We really are. But that's okay. Michelle Bachmann says, we should get those nuclear missiles up there ready to strike Iran if they don't do what we tell them to do. Which is what? You Iran, get rid of your nuclear weapons. We don't have any. I'm telling you, if you don't get rid of your nuclear weapons, we will have to destroy you. We don't have any. We got a power station. Switch goes up, lights go on. Switch goes down, lights go up. It's electricity. You should try some. Iran says they will continue to deploy their warships in the Gulf of Mexico despite U.S. threats. Oh, I'm sorry, I have that backwards. It's the United States saying they'll continue to deploy warships in the Persian Gulf despite Iranian threats. Now, the U.S. has basically hit Iran with more sanctions. It took about 10% off their currency earlier today. Iran is understandably a little bit miffed because Iran understands these sanctions have no basis in reality. It's all about the weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein, wherever he wound up, if you believe South Park, he's down there bunking with Satan, Saddam has to be laughing his head off, not counting the rope. Because he's been through this thing. He says, they lie about weapons of mass destruction and they come and take your country away from you. That's just how the U.S. works. Israel has to get the war with Iran going before Ron Paul has a chance to actually pull the plug. Or even worse, just in the campaign, start rallying the American people against the wars. So they're going to try and get this thing going just as fast as they can here. Now, this whole situation with Iran's warships and the sanctions and all the rest of it, just a little mind experiment here. Hypothetically, imagine we live in a United States that hasn't invaded anybody in 200 years. Yes, it's a fantasy. Bear with me for a moment. Both Iran and the United States have signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This part is true. Then one day, Iran, goaded by some unnamed foreign power, declares that the nuclear power stations operated by the United States are a threat to the safety of the world, even though the United States hasn't actually invaded anyone in recent memory. Stay with me on this. And Iran demands the nuclear power stations be shut down. The United States, of course, would refuse. These are just power stations, and they are legal under the terms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran signed right alongside the United States. That unnamed foreign power did not, just to get in there. So, Iran seeking to use economic pressures to force the United States to surrender its rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and shut down their nuclear power stations, sanctions the United States, and bans all exports of oil to the United States of America. This does, in fact, and would cause great economic harm to the country. Then Iran starts deploying their navy into the Gulf of Mexico. It's technically international waters, but they're right up against our shorelines, looking out from Galveston. You're going to see the Iran's warships, and they're going to bang their guns around, and they're going to fly their airplanes and all the rest of that stuff, while behind you, the life that you labored to build is crumbling from these foreign sanctions. So you just stand there thinking about, how does that look to you? You know you haven't done anything wrong. You know you don't have nuclear weapons. You're not building nuclear weapons any more than Saddam Hussein was. And so how would you feel if Iran was sailing in the Gulf of Mexico saying, you better do what we tell you or we're going to crush you. You better get rid of those nuclear weapons. We don't have any. Actually, the U.S. does. But, I mean, the point here is the media, the corporate media, is trying to say that the U.S. automatically has a right to send their warships anywhere in the world and threaten anybody to do as they're told. And that we should just go on and believe anything that the U.S. says about Iran's nuclear weapons of mass destruction, even though they lied through their teeth about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. So look at it from the other point of view. The U.S. is throwing their weight around, screaming about weapons of mass destruction that don't exist again, and getting ready to go to war, getting ready to send your sons, your daughters, off to whack yet another one of Israel's innumerable enemies. That's why they're scared of Ron Paul. He's going to throw a pail of cold water on this darn foolishness. Which, by the way, that's the president's real job. If you go back to the Constitution, it's not the president's job to go out and torture people and lock them up and throw bombs at everybody. If you go back to the Constitution, the president's sole job is to throw a pail of cold water on Congress when they need it. That's the president's sole job. He's got that little veto stamp. That's the bucket of cold water. The president's constitutional job is to throw cold water on darn foolishness from the Congress of the United States of America. And otherwise to simply say, okay, these are the law of the land, I'm going to enforce it. And that's it. That's the rest of it. All these other authorities and powers are from all these endless states of emergencies and stuff. Now, getting back to the situation with Iran, we have all of these American military commanders who are eager for a new war in Iran because it'll mean more money. We have more money and more, junkets and defense contractors kissing our butts and, giving us all kinds of presents and girls and boys and all, and cars and all these other things that go along with making the deal for these huge weapons systems here. Now, I'm a realist, and I understand the United States Navy can defeat Iran. But it's not going to be cheap. Because China is providing silkworm missiles to Iran. Russia is providing sunburn missiles, as well as the new one just came online, the Yakunt. These are sea-skimming cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, and the Yakunt especially is designed to evade the phalanx close-in weapons system, the little R2-D2 Gatling guns that the U.S. says, these will protect us from anything. Well, the Yakunt is designed to basically evade it. It changes courses too quickly, the phalanx cannot home in on it, and so forth and so on. And by the way, contrary to the media prognostications, the Aegis radar system is not effective against close-in sea-skimming cruise missiles. It can't get a lock on them because of the crenellated ocean surface. Heck, they couldn't even keep it from killing a 747 off the coast of Long Island, but that's another story entirely. And of course, Russia has just provided the very latest in radar jamming technology to Iran, which would prevent the Aegis system from actually working all that well. So, act of stupidity on the way. We're going to take a break. We'll be back for the last segment of today's show after these words from our sponsors. Let's see. Now, here's an interesting little story that came down today, and it's just one of those where you slap your hand to your forehead and say, what the heck are these people thinking? Here in the United States of America, money is so tight, Detroit is having to shut down their precinct offices at night. Firehouses are being shut down. Infant nutrition is down, but child poverty is soaring, and yet the money from you is still flowing into the pockets of Israel and their military. Want to know what they're doing with it? Haaretz reported today that the Israeli army, using this money that you are forced to give them, is now training soldiers about to leave the surface to be sushi chefs. They're taking that money to teach these Israeli soldiers how to be sushi chefs because, after all, Israel doesn't want any more of those gosh darn Japanese running around their purely Jewish state. That's the policy. We're going to teach Israeli soldiers to be sushi chefs because we all have sushi. We just don't want the Japanese to go with it. And it's shocking for two reasons. One, the xenophobia and racism that is openly on display here. And, of course, the revelation about how Israel is using all this money you're forced to give them at a time of drastic cuts and forced austerity for we, the people. It's just shocking here. Meanwhile, the United States has deployed more troops and radar to protect Israel from an Iranian counterattack when the war starts. God, that's funny. I thought we'd already given some very nice radars to Israel. Oh, that's right. They sold them to China. We are on the doorstep of a global nuclear war brought to you by the people who think it is the will of the invisible man in the clouds that we incinerate ourselves and our planet in his infinite mercy. Now, I want to talk about this show, All American Muslim, and I know that Claire is going to be joining us later in the week to talk about this show, but I had a chance to catch an episode of it the other night over the holiday after all the brouhaha from this pro-Israel group trying to organize a boycott, trying to get the advertisers to quit this show. And they did succeed with Lowe's Home Improvement, which is why I am never going into a Lowe's as long as I shall live, and for several months after that. And so I watched the show, and basically I can understand why Israel hates this program. Because it shows these American Muslims as people, human beings. Oh my goodness. They're not sitting there making bombs and planning to blow up the United States. They're worried about marriage. They're worried about their kids. They're worried about making a living, making ends meet in these hard economic times. If you take away the religious regalia, they look and sound just like us. In fact, they sound like they're from New York. They're not evil people. They're not caricatures from a Jeff Dunham ventriloquist act. They're men, women, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. They're kids. They're people. Just like me, just like you. That makes this show incredibly dangerous to Israel and the war machine. Because you can't start a war on people who look and act and sound just like you. What was it Kennedy said a while back? I should have looked this up before I did the show about, we all see the same sky. We all breathe the same air. We're all mortal. We all cherish our children's futures. When you set aside all this manufactured, invented differences of religion and politics, we're all one people. We all have the same concerns, the same problems. The war machine, the Israelis can't stand that. They have to dehumanize the Muslims. They have to declare them to be Untermenschen. They're hajis, they're towelheads, they're ragheads, they're sand niggers. I mean, these are some of the names that we constantly see to refer to Muslims and Arabs, whether in our country or other countries, and they're not fair. It's as unfair as when the Americans were having to call the Vietnamese gooks and slants and slopes. We can't acknowledge them as our fellow human beings, because then it becomes harder to get people to pull the trigger on them. Even with all these new video game displays that just blur them to white blobs so you can't actually see the horror of what you're doing with these drones. It's part of making them the enemy, saying that they're less than human. They're not worthy of your concern. They're just cattle. They're goyim. We don't have to care about them. And this show, I applaud the Learning Channel and Discovery, and I sent them a very long email about how wonderful I thought the show was, and I encourage you to do the same. And I got a very nice reply back from them. The controversy has increased the viewership of the show, and that's a good thing because Americans need to see this program. They need to see that Muslims are not automatically evil slime people. They really are just like you and I, and they dress a little differently. The women have shawls over their head. And I want to tell you something. When I was a kid, kerchiefs on the hair was the fashion. My mother wore one all the time. She's not Muslim. She was raised Congregationalist. But that was the fashion. So if you get a chance, tune into the show All American Muslim. Go make rude noises in front of the Lowe's hardware home improvement stores. And if you get a chance, drop a note to Learning Channel and congratulate them for this.